are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is about a 13-year-old who survived a murder treehouse. Now, when a little girl met a monster, she had no idea whether she would become a survivor or just another victim. But she made a choice for herself that day to overcome the darkness. If you don't know, it's my absolute passion to tell these stories. I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if that's something you'd like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leave me a nice comment down below. And let's get back to the story. So it was 2010 in Ohio, and the Maynard family lived in a place called Howard. This was actually 32-year-old mother Tina Herman and her two children, who were 11-year-old Cody and 13-year-old Sarah. Now, Tina was this force to be reckoned with, a courageous and energetic woman whose whole identity, whose whole happiness surrounded her children and just taking care of them as a single mother. She worked at the local Dairy Queen, but when she wasn't there, she actually loved to plant her sunflowers, and she also had dolphin memorabilia collection that she would always be adding to. She had raised the sweetest children on her own. Cody was known to be always very gentle with such a huge heart. At only 11 years old, he was in 5th grade at the East Knox Elementary and played every sport he could get his hands on. Sarah was 2 years older than him and also loved sports. She was known to be a more soft-spoken teenager, but she too played all the sports she could. And the family also had the sweetest dog. I could not find what breed the dog was, but it was their family dog that they all adored. But on November 11th, Tina did not show up to her shift at Dairy Queen, and her manager Valerie knew that this was not like her at all. She loved going to Dairy Queen, even though it wasn't a corporate job. It wasn't the best paying job, but she loved being around the customers and seeing them daily and making them happy. So she was never late. She also knew she had to provide for her children, so she was always on time and making it to her shifts. So her manager Valerie noticed she didn't come in that day. She'd never called, and Valerie decided to go and check on her at her home. Now, when she was headed to this home in Howard, she noticed it was a pretty isolated area. You know, the neighborhood didn't have too much going on. There was also woods across the street from the home, and it was very peaceful. So when she went up to the door, she noticed that the front door was locked, which I guess was a good sign in her eyes, but she went ahead and went around to the back and crawled in a window. At this point, she could get nobody to answer her, but she did notice that there was blood. There was enough blood there that she decided she needed to call the police. She knew that this was more blood than just a cut finger or one of the kids being hurt at a sports game. So she decided to call investigators, and they would come in, and the peacefulness of this neighborhood would be completely shattered. There were officers everywhere searching around the area, searching inside the home, and there was enough blood that they decided to report these people missing. Now, they ended up calling the school for Cody and Sarah, and that would confirm that they too had gone home and would have been at this residence because they weren't at friends' houses that night either. As the crime scene kind of expanded into the woods, that is when they found Tina Herman's pickup truck. Now, this was actually on a bike trail that was near the Kenyon College, which ended up being put in lockdown because they were worried that this possible abductor, possible killer, was on the loose in that area. This college was also not far from their home. There was no blood or further evidence found inside this truck that could lead them to believe that this was a kidnapping or murder. That is when a Cherokee Jeep was also found in another location, still nearby the home, that appeared to be abandoned as well. Now, when they looked at the registration inside, they showed that it was for a woman named Stephanie Sprang. This didn't appear to have anything to do with their case until they started diving into the family's personal lives. You see, they found through friends and family and neighbors that Tina's best friend was named Stephanie. She was always at the house hanging out with the family, And she actually had 3 children of her own, which were Michael, Trisha, and Seth. She was known to be this bubbly girl with an unforgettable smile on her face, and she was someone who loved get-togethers and hanging out with her friends, always wanted to be around loved ones, especially her bestie, Tina. They practically lived together with how much Stephanie was always there, and it made it kind of easy because she was also a neighbor and didn't live far. When they checked, Stephanie Sprang was not at her home either, and her children had no idea where she was if she wasn't with Tina. This case had then escalated to 4 missing persons and a missing dog. Now, the timeline was pieced together for the past week at this point, and they found that on Tuesday, November 9th, the family had a great day. They went to work, they went to school, they came home, they had a regular dinner, they had homework done, and then they all watched TV together before going to bed. It was the usual night at home, and the next morning at 9 a.m., Tina, Cody, and Sarah all left the home to, drop the kids off at school. Tina arrived back home after dropping them off, and Stephanie was said to come over after that. But the next day, no one could say what had happened. Meanwhile, what nobody knew was that 13-year-old Sarah was in between a place that was the outside and the inside. She had no idea of her surroundings. She had never experienced this before. She was bound with a rope. She was gagged, and she was in a trash bag with the leg holes cut out as a makeshift diaper. All she could think about in her shock was getting back to school, that she was missing school, and investigators at this point knew nothing. But Sarah, who was in the midst of it, didn't know much more. All she could focus on was her will to survive. While she fought, investigators couldn't say for certain that anyone was still alive. They found bloodied rubber gloves on the sink in the bathroom of the family home, and it made it hard to believe that anyone had survived. Yet they kept the hope that at least one person got to walk out of the house that day due to the shoe prints they had found. They found size 7.5 shoes in the dirt and the grass outside of the home, and they could tell that it was females, but they couldn't tell whether this was a woman or a girl. However, this pushed them to work faster if there was a chance of a survivor or multiple of them. Then, outside of the family home, directly across the street, inside of those woods that I was telling you about, investigators had found a Walmart bag. And inside were 2 tarps with a box of 55-gallon heavy-duty trash bags next to a sleeping bag and camping equipment. With this, they knew they had a breakthrough if they could just get a hold of Walmart's surveillance cameras and see who had bought those things. So as investigators reached the store, they saw the cameras miraculously working, and the hope soared. So as they were combing through the footage and the tarps and the trash bag entered view as they were put on the conveyor belt, the camera was paused. A white man was seen purchasing them. However, what surprised them most was the feeling of recognition that they all had when seeing him. No one could really place it, so the recording switched to the cameras outside of the Walmart to see what he was driving and which way he went. And that is when he walked out, and it dawned on the deputy. You see, the man they were looking at was a man they had seen before the night the disappearance had been found. The same man had driven up in the same car, which was a Toyota Yaris, while they were examining Tina's truck on that trail. He had been questioned as he appeared in a random crime scene and was kind of slowing down. They questioned him on why he was there. He said that he was waiting for his girlfriend to get off work at the Kenya Inn Hotel, and they let him through. Didn't think much of it until now. They began searching all of the Toyotas in the area to see if they could get a match to this man, and 4 days after the disappearances, investigators had a suspect. His name was Matthew Hoffman. The same day, on November 14th, the SWAT team was brought in to raid his home, which was in Mount Vernon, which was about 14 minutes from Howard. Now, the officers burst through the door, throwing in a flash grenade, and they found a body on the couch just as they got in the door. And Detective Feeney yanked the person onto the floor and heard a man say, "What's going on?" To which he answered, "You tell me." They then identified this man as Matthew and began a full search, but they immediately noticed it was barely furnished in there. However, that wasn't the strangest part. When they looked in the first bedroom, they noticed that it was completely covered with leaves, not just a dusting as though it had flown in the door and nobody cleaned it up. It was hundreds, thousands piled in this room, hiding the entire floor. The walls were also covered with insulation, but it was actually hundreds of plastic shopping bags filled with leaves as well. As they continued walking through the home, they noticed that the basement door was being blocked by a sewing cabinet, and so they moved it out of the way and they began walking downstairs. What they found was another room filled with an overabundance of leaves, yet this time there was a girl on top. Sarah noticed the officers and immediately asked them to take her to school because she was late. As she was rushed out, not to school, but to a hospital, the investigators went back to work digging through these piles of leaves because their greatest fear was that beneath all of this foliage were the bodies that were still missing. They began poking the piles with sticks, and in the bathroom they found 110 bags of leaves attached to the walls and covering the mirror, yet they weren't finding Tina, Cody, or Stephanie. Then, in the basement, they found this giant freezer, and bracing themselves for what they believed they would find, they slowly opened the lid. Yet, what was inside the freezer consisted of two things: red popsicles and frozen deceased squirrels. The walls all over this home were also covered in doodles. There was a giant peace sign on the door, stars on the wall, black doodles on the bathtub, and investigators had also found receipts inside the home that showed that Matthew had bought gloves 6 days before the disappearances, and only 2 days prior he had bought duct tape and another pair of gloves, and he had also ordered a knife. But as he was taken down to the station, Tina, Cody, and Stephanie were still missing, and he refused to talk. He sat slumped over with every question that was sent his way. He ignored it. But 15 minutes into the interrogation, he raised his hands and began thumping on his chest with his fist. The detective asked if that meant that he was heartbroken over what had happened, but he shook his head no. So the detective then asked, "Did someone break your heart?" And this time he didn't answer.
Heart hurts. I don't understand sign language, man. Is that your heart? You're saying heart? Broken. Your heart's broken? Because of what happened? No. Someone broke your heart? I know you can talk to me, man. What do you want from us? Tell me what you want from us. You gotta talk to me.
Now, for the next 4 hours, he said absolutely nothing. Investigators had a young girl in the hospital being treated while 3 others were still missing, and yet Matthew wouldn't even give them a clue as to what he did with them or why. But while he wasn't talking, investigators found that this was not the first time Matthew Hoffman had been arrested. When he was 19, which was around 11 years prior, he broke into a condo in Colorado where he was working as a plumber, and he was going to rob them. He was caught only after he returned to the condo building and dumped 10 gallons of gasoline, setting it on fire. There were 16 people who also lived there who thankfully all got out and were fine, but it was worth $2 million in damages once it was done. It was deemed a calculated event by Matthew, and he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. This meant that he was released in 2007, which was 3 years prior to this kidnapping in Ohio. Investigators were searching the community for Tina, Cody, and Stephanie, and there were hundreds of volunteers helping, but they were still coming up empty-handed. Then, 2 days later, on November 16th, Special Agent Joe Dietz interrogated Matthew for the very first time. This was off camera in a single-stall restroom, which was in hopes that Matthew would finally talk if he wasn't on record. And he was out of the usual, interrogation room, and that's exactly what would happen. When Matthew was told that they weren't recording, he began to talk. He said he thought he was crazy, that he did something bad. He wouldn't be there if he didn't, but he was afraid to know what it actually was. He said he would help if he could, but he couldn't remember.
Where's the sadness coming from? crazy.
Why do you think that?
Because I must have done something bad. I wouldn't be here if I didn't.
Well, that can be worked through.
I'm afraid to even know what it was I did.
You're afraid to have me know what you did?
I'm afraid to even know what I did.
No. It can only help you. You can't work through something you don't know.
I don't know if there's other people are.
What other people?
What's those guys grilled me about yesterday?
Well, I'm concerned about you right now. It sounds like that's a lot of where it's coming from. You're not feeling confused.
The next day, though, Matthew admitted that he had had a nightmare the night before about being in a food processing plant where he opened trash bags filled with dismembered body parts, and he said he had a knot in his stomach, and it all began to come back to him. Then he finally agreed to admit what all had happened. He would be writing it down in a letter for his lawyer, and he told the special agent that after he wrote everything down, including the locations of the bodies, he would then fake an escape out of jail, to which this special agent would need to track him down and shoot him to death. Only then would they be allowed to know why and how he did this.
Well, I hope you have learned enough about us to know that we're honest and genuine with what we're saying, and
That's
you don't
why I
have to
don't
worry.
want to talk with you.
That's why you what?
You're too empathetic.
We're too nice. That's why we won't do the deed. But you know, there's the problem though, Matt, is that if you don't really have the information, nobody's gonna kill you without knowing. Nobody's gonna have you write on a note, and then, you know, here, I've written it on the note. Don't open it till after I'm dead. Now kill me. I mean, nobody's gonna do that.
Well, can you think of any better way?
Yeah. We've been telling you. You know, tell the story. Get it off your chest.
I don't have any story.
Well, you've bits and pieces that have been coming out over the last 3 days, man. I mean, if you were in my position and you were listening to me, you would feel the same way.
Matthew said he could not live with what he had done, and if this could not happen, he would kill himself in jail. He didn't want to be injected with thorazine for the rest of his life while in prison, and he knew he was a monster. This medicine was what they were giving him for his schizophrenia. After the special agent heard what Matthew's plan was, he of course refused this, and Matthew said at this point he didn't actually know where the bodies were, that he lied, and he refused to talk any longer. He was also put on suicide watch in the prison at this time. 2 days later, though, he did begin talking again, and this time he gave an exact address. He said that they should head to the Kokosing Wildlife Area near Fredericktown. There, they would find a 60-foot tall tree, and investigators arrived at the scene. They found this huge tree that had fallen down and been hollowed out. This was in preparation to move it from the preserve, but inside there were 3 garbage bags containing the bodies of Tina, Cody, and Stephanie, and there was also a deceased dog. They were dismembered, just as Matthew had claimed happened in his nightmare. Hearing of this tragedy, the neighborhood actually set up a memorial outside of the family home with flowers and balloons. They also set up a fund at Dairy Queen for $1 of each blizzard going to the family of Stephanie and to Sarah, who was still in the hospital. The DQ manager, Valerie, who had begun the whole investigation, said, "There's some peace in knowing that they aren't suffering, because that was a major concern. We're very glad that that part has ended. but devastated over the fact that they will never be back. Matthew then wrote a 4-page confession letter after investigators told him they wouldn't be seeking the death penalty, which the families did agree to. He started at the beginning, saying that he parked in Howard and had been walking through the houses in the neighborhood when he decided to sleep across the street from Tina's home. When the family left that morning, he entered the unlocked garage and he said this was in order to rob them. He was looking around for anyone home and he was actually not finding anything to take, but he said that that's not really why he did it. It was because of the excitement of being in somebody else's home. He wasn't able to find anything valuable and was actually getting ready to leave when someone pulled in the driveway. He wasn't able to break a window and get out, so he got the knife that he had bought and confronted Tina. He made her get onto the bed, lying face down, and began hitting her in the head, but was getting frustrated because this wasn't knocking her out. While he was panicking, Stephanie came in and was actually screaming at him, and so he grabbed the knife, chased her down, and stabbed her to death. He then went back after Tina and killed her as well. He claimed that he was in shock at this time. He was wandering around the house, and that's when he said he killed the dog because it was barking too much. Matthew then planned to take the bodies to Foundation Park Pond, driving the car into the water and then running out, but he said it was too cold for him to make it back out, so he decided to process the bodies and dispose of them inside of this hollow tree. So he took them to the bathroom to dismember them and stick them in trash bags. He then moved them into Stephanie's Jeep, and that is when the children came home. He confronted them and Sarah ran to the bedroom, but this was while Cody was being stabbed to death. He then ran after her, but couldn't bring himself to kill her. He said, "I did not enter the house to kill those people. I did not know a single one of them. I did not know their names, and I do not know who lived at that house. I chose the house to break into because there was not any close neighbors, and I noticed the garage door was ajar. I chose the house the day before. I did not plan for any of this to happen. I did not want to kill anyone, and I tried to knock the first woman out so that I would be able to escape. This was not working. A second woman showed up, and things quickly spiraled out of control. They kept escalating, and I was panicking. I only chose to process the bodies and make their disposal easier." He then claimed that he threw Sarah in the back seat with her bound and gagged, and the reason he gave for having 13-year-old Sarah Maynard in his basement filled with leaves was that the little girl liked the bed and it was extremely comfy. He said he had given Sarah Treasure Island, the book, to read, and that he watched Iron Man with her, that he would cook hamburgers for her and fed her the whole time. But Sarah did not allow this to be the story for long because she decided, barely yet a teenager, to speak up against this monster. She said that she was sexually assaulted. She was cut on her finger with a knife. She was gagged and unable to eat or shower. And she was also trying to tell investigators that she thought that he killed the family dog. She did not yet know about her family, and she just hadn't seen them since that day. Sarah didn't want his confession letter to make anybody feel like he treated her well, to make him feel good about himself because he was lying about how good he was to her. Sarah was interviewed during this time and she said she knew she was brave, that people asked her a lot of questions about what happened in those 4 excruciating days, and she said she just listened to everything her abductor was telling her to do, just hoping that someone would find her so she would no longer have to live with this man, no longer have to experience this anymore.
So tell us why you wanted to be here this morning and what it is you want to say.
To let people know how I could survive what he did to me, so I just listened to everything he told me to do
And got through it. Your kidnapper held you for 4 days. It had to be very scary for you. How did you stay strong through all of that, Sarah?
just hoping someone would find me and so I won't have to live with him again. Or stay there with him.
Yeah, he said during his confession that he admitted that he bound your hands and your feet, but he also said that he made hamburgers for you. How did he act around you? Was he trying to befriend you, or was he constantly threatening you, Sarah?
No, I think he was just trying to say that in his letter to make people think that he felt good about himself, for him to think that he fed me and stuff, and he didn't. He didn't let me shower or do any of that stuff.
Did he just keep you down in his basement, essentially?
Yeah.
She was left alone in the basement. She had no idea that Matthew was going to dispose of the bodies of the rest of her family members. He then decided to go back to the home the next day in order to set fire to all of the possible evidence. And that is when he drove his truck down Canyon Trail and came in contact with the police officers who were looking at Tina's truck. The cans of gasoline he was going to use were nearby, so he wasn't able to grab them. What I didn't tell you, though, was that the name that Matthew had given the investigators as to who his girlfriend was Sarah, the name of the girl that he had kidnapped and had in his basement. Matthew Hoffman was being charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, rape, kidnapping, aggravated burglary, and tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse, and he did plead guilty. However, he still claimed that he entered that home that day to rob, not to kill anyone.
It's been indicated to me it's your desire at this time to enter a guilty plea to counts 1 and counts 2 of the indictment, charges of aggravated murder and unclassified felony. Is that a correct statement? It's also been indicated to me it's your desire to enter a guilty plea to count 3, an additional charge of aggravated murder under a different statute, an unclassified felony. Is that a correct statement? It's also been indicated to me it's your desire to enter a guilty plea to count 4, a charge of aggravated burglary, a first-degree felony. Is that a correct statement?
Yes.
You desire to enter a guilty plea to count 5, charge of kidnapping, a first-degree felony. Correct?
Yes.
And is it your desire to enter a guilty plea to count 6, a charge of rape, a first-degree felony?
Yes.
And to count 7, a charge of tampering with evidence, a third-degree felony?
Yes.
And it's your desire to enter a guilty plea to counts 8, 9, and 10, charges of abuse of corpse, fifth-degree felonies. Correct?
Yes.
Is there anything the defendant would like to say on his own behalf, or anything counsel for the defendant would like to put on the record before the court passes sentence?
Your Honor, Mr. Hoffman has asked me to make a brief statement. And that is simply, the family deserves to know that this was a random burglary that went terribly, terribly wrong. No one person, no family was singled out. It's tragic. I can't undo what is done. I apologize.
Sarah actually wrote a statement to be read to her abductor in court, and this said, "This has changed my whole life and my family's life too. I want to tell you that I am not scared of him. I just want to live my life. This is so sickening, Matthew, to know you even had the guts to do this to a family." It turned out that 30-year-old Matthew Hoffman was once a tree trimmer but was unemployed at this time. Neighbors called him very strange, that he had erratic behavior. He was known to kill squirrels and eat them, trap small animals in his yard. He would set small fires in his lawn and was often sitting in trees listening to their conversations. A neighbor called Donna said that she always told her children to stay indoors when he was outside and that he was always lurking. She said he was very different. Many people called him a psychopath, and when he was arrested for the first time, he was described as a quiet young man who was very strange, that he was a follower and didn't have a strong personality. Forensic psychologists testified that his obsession with leaves and trees were definitely indications of mental illness and delusion. Dr. James Allen Fox said that if trees gave him comfort, that is why he put the bodies inside. And Dr. N.G. Burrell said it certainly suggests that he is likely to be mentally ill as compared to other killers who show up in the news like serial killers or psychopaths. Serial killers, from a professional point of view, they are not mentally ill. They have character disturbances, but they know what they are doing is wrong. They take too much pleasure, too much gratification to stop. But on January 6th of 2011, he was given 3 life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole and 9 years for burglary, kidnapping, and rape, with 4 years for tampering with evidence and 11 months for abuse of a corpse. Sarah says that she tries to stay strong by getting on with her life and not thinking about what happened. She ended up moving in with her father and her stepmother, and her father, Larry, said that her strength is such an inspiration, that as a father, he's supposed to be this teacher, but he feels like she could teach him far more than he could ever teach her. Larry said he doesn't believe for an instant that these murders were simply a burglary gone wrong, that a thief steals and a murderer kills, and if he was there to burglarize the home, Why did he take the time to stake out the home, and why did he bring a knife? 2 years later, though, Sarah, who was 16 at this time, was back in the spotlight once again. It was 2013, and Sarah Maynard had gone to the police saying that her father and her stepmother were abusing her. Now, she said that her father had punched her in the back and threatened to kill her, and that her stepmother had kicked her down the stairs. Now, the girl, who had already been through so much trauma at such a young age, appeared not to be doing the healing she needed to do because she was still in danger. They were both charged with the misdemeanor counts of domestic violence and assault, and a protection order was issued for Sarah. She was not going to have to testify, yet the charges against them were eventually dismissed, and this was because she agreed to dismiss them after they agreed to take parenting classes, a psychological assessment, and counseling. And they also would not fight the transfer of Sarah living with her grandmother. But I truly hope the survivor can now heal and get the peace she deserves after going through far too much at a young age. Since this, Sarah has actually been in a documentary which was about Jamie Kloss, where Elizabeth Smart brought a whole bunch of survivors together to tell the story about Jamie's abduction. And Sarah ended up saying, of course there are days where we all feel hopeless and we want to give up, you know? Of course, I'm sure all of us feel that way, but we can't. Tina's family has also started the Healing Hearts Memorial Fund to help others affected by violence, and the whole community got involved, hosting a hot air balloon festival. Sarah is also involved now, hoping that it will help children like her cope with heartbreak and losing family members to murder. Now, the tree that Tina, Cody, and Stephanie were all found in has since been moved out of the area because it was said to be attracting people as more of like a sightseeing event than a crime scene. But do you believe Matthew planned to murder anyone that day? Was this all because of some sort of psychosis delusion that he was having? Or was he a psychopath? Or was he suffering from both? I love to hear your thoughts. And of course, leave such wonderful, beautiful comments for the survivor, because I don't think I've ever told you guys this on there, but Alicia Kozak, one of the other survivor cases that we have done, actually reached out to me and said that she couldn't bring herself to watch the video, but she did read all of your guys' comments on that video, and it made her so happy to know that she had your guys' support. So your guys' comments really do mean everything, and I want you guys to know that from the bottom of my heart, from the bottom of all the survivors and victims' hearts. The fact that you watch, the fact that you care truly matters. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces.